had a dream back in February that the best battery could be made out of salt. And now I'm hearing about sodium ion batteries. So
Yeah, because sodium and lithium are right next to each other on the periodic chart. So they have very similar properties. The nice thing about sodium is that there's plenty of it.
yeah, yep. It has different properties, but I'm now convinced that I actually never woke up. That this is just an extended part of that same dream. Um, or I made a good guess.
Okay.
But yeah, sodium batteries have different properties, meaning they don't, lithium kind of charges up to a point and then maintains that same charge. Like it goes up and then is a line, straight line.
Yeah.
Sodium really doesn't. It kind of keeps going up straight. And that can be problematic. And I think there has to be new technology in terms of converting the energy so that when it's high, when it's low, and it doesn't cause problems. I think it's not a good battery for a car ultimately, probably a great battery for storing solar and wind.
Sure.
And cheap.
Yeah. We've covered this before, which is people suddenly realize that, oh, different applications require different performance characteristics from the battery. And
Right.
we've been really focused on mobile, which is phones and cars.
Right.
And when it's mobile, your key metric is like how much oomph per cubic liter of battery. But because space is at a premium, so it has to be compact and has to deliver a lot of stuff, and everything else goes by the wayside.
Yeah.
But if you've got a garage, who cares? Just stack them up. I don't need them to be terribly small or anything like that. Just stack them up, and
Right.
they
And
can be cheap.
that's just personal use, but in terms of power plants where you have a lot of wind turbines or a lot of solar panels, this is actually a great new technology.
Yeah.
And there are companies that are taking advantage of it. With this sort of new-ish battery companies that are using it. Anyway, it's a bit of a hopeful change that I came across. Very interesting technologies, batteries. I have no idea how batteries work, honestly. I'd love to have somebody explain it to me.
I can explain to you.
How do you explain? How does a battery work, Lionel?
A battery, fundamentally, what you're doing is that you have positive and negative charged particles. You have a substance, right?
Yeah.
And we know that substances have charge.
Right.
And so most atoms are electrically neutral because the reigning picture of an atom is that there's a positively charged nucleus circled by an equal number of negatively charged electrons.
Right.
So atoms tend to be electrically neutral. However, they can become electrically unneutral because they get turned into ions. And what an ion is when you have too many,
Right. Of one of the
or
other.
too few electrons. You
Oh,
can't really
electrons.
change the
Okay.
nucleus. You can't
Right,
change the
that's true.
nucleus because
Yeah.
that's like things that go boom. But you can, it's very
You can change
easy.
the electrons.
It's very easy to strip electrons. Well, it depends, but you can add electrons, which means you now have a negative ion, or you can remove an electron, which is a positive ion.
But how
And
do you
what a
keep
bat-
them in that state? I mean, that's right, and that's actually a really nice description of kind of what you're doing when you're charging a battery. But how does the battery keep the positive and negatively charged ions in the state that they're in until you want to use them?
Well, they separate them. And the ions are separated from each other, and then you have two terminals. Thank God nobody listens to this, because
Yeah.
somebody been
Like,
immediately screaming,
that-
"You're totally full of crap." But fundamentally, what happens is you put all the negatively charged stuff on one side, and you put the positively charged stuff on the other side, and they're trying to find a way to get back together again.
Right.
Is what they're trying to do.
So you open the door.
Those are the two terminals of the battery, because that's what electrical energy is. It's a circuit.
Okay.
It's a
You
circuit.
don't open the door. Right.
Well, the door is the car or your phone. Yeah. And as the electrons or whatever, as the charges move, they want to get from one pole of the battery, from one, there's always two things sticking out, the anode and the cathode.
Hmm.
And as they flee from one and they try to get to the other one, they have to do work to do that. And that's what powers
Right.
your phone. That's what powers the car.
All
That's why
right.
it's called a lithium ion battery, because it's
Right.
all about ions. And I think this is the way almost all batteries have worked since the beginning of time, including lead acid and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of it
Little
relies
brother.
upon.
The little brother works that way too. When you give your little brother a positive charge or a negative. Oh, sorry. I'm just reliving my childhood here. So, so I'm kidding. You plug your little brother into the wall, and then you just
Yeah, let's
yeah.
honestly,
No,
really, I
no.
think it's just better we pass over this
Okay,
in
that's probably a good
silence,
idea. Yeah.
honestly, because John may call up and say, "Oh,
Yeah. I
that
remember that
you,
now.
you, I'm
You
coming up there.
bastard.
You just wait. I know where you live, and I'm coming after you with a big Van de Graaff generator. You see how you like it." So that's sort of like the classic battery technology: is use work, such as burning of fossil fuel or collecting electricity from photons from the sun hitting a panel, a silicon panel,
Yep. Or kinetic
and
energy from the wind.
you
Yeah.
use that to do work, which is to separate these ions who don't want to be separated. They want to be together and achieve electrical neutrality. And then, so you're creating a potential difference between the two sides,
And a pathway.
and a pathway between those two where, yeah, you can get to the other side, but you got to pay a toll. You got to do some work for me. You got to turn this motor, or you got to light this LED for me. That's generally what it is. And so you can make ions out of any kind of thing. I mean, they're talking about iron air batteries and sodium ion batteries and lithium ion batteries. And again, what people are waking up to is that lithium is not the only game in town. It's very powerful and it's extraordinarily good for mobile applications such as cars and phones. But if you're not mobile, a whole different, lithium ion batteries have downsides. They catch on fire every now and then. There's only so much. Lithium is only found in large quantities in specific locations around the globe, whereas sodium's everywhere, iron's everywhere, air's everywhere. So even if the battery performs less, it's still a great thing as long as it meets the performance characteristics you need. You're not going to put an iron, you're not going to put some of these lesser batteries on like a spacecraft, because that has certain very hard constraints. But anyway, so that's what's working. The good news, I'm not an expert in any of these technologies, but the good news is that there's a lot of people, there's a lot of researchers around the world and companies around the world that are focusing very heavily on this, because regardless of all the froth back and forth and stuff like that, the future of the world is clear. We will probably be using petroleum for a long time to make paint and make fertilizers and to make adhesives and to make all kinds of things and to make plastics and all the stuff we need. There's not a lot of, there's some alternatives to that, but the age of burning petroleum is coming to an end. It's just a question of how fast or how slow it occurs and how much it dislocates everybody's economies, but it's coming to an end.
I mean, you just look at the reduced production and refinement that's going to be happening in Russia. That will have an effect down the road on petroleum everywhere, and of course, Iran is currently having an effect.
And the thing that really does too, the interesting thing is, it's not like you're just swapping. So obviously, you're swapping out one type of energy source for another, and that disrupts things like people who are heavily invested in using petroleum for power generation. They gotta dance. They got to move and adjust and stuff like that. But the more interesting thing to me is that changes the whole structure of the distribution network, which is when you're talking about nuclear power or petroleum burning, you're talking about large centralized plants, because you're dealing with dangerous substances and you're talking about economies of scale. So you tend to build really big plants that then rely upon a big distribution network to get that power from centralized things out to people. The more interesting thing is that with solar, especially, you have a possibility of a very distributed system where consumers are essentially largely independent, and you don't need that. And that sounds like a really cool thing, and it is, but it's also it creates a whole problem of its own, which is you have this enormous distribution network. It has to be maintained. You
Yep.
can't tear it down right now. You may not be able to tear it down for another 100 years, but you've still got to pay for it, and you still got to keep it working because people may still rely upon those centralized things for like emergency power, or if the skies go dark for if there's cloud cover for several months or
Yeah.
whatever it is. And that sets up a really complex and tricky economic calculus. Like, people still got to pay for a distribution network that they may not use a lot, but they're
That's a
going
good
to have to pay
point.
for it. And that's going to create a lot of friction. That's going to
Yeah.
create a
Yeah.
lot of arguments and contention.
Hmm.
Interesting. It'll just be interesting to see
Yeah.
how it plays out. But the thing I loved was I think we talked about the last time, or talked about before, this whole thing of balcony solar. Did we talk about that?
No, balcony solar. No. What
So
is that?
what balcony solar is something that's been in Europe for a long time. And by the way, when you go and you read these boards about solar energy, the Europeans just piss themselves laughing at how much Americans are spending on solar panels. Like, the guy says, in Poland, we pay like 1/5 of what you're paying for a solar panel.
Wow.
But the more important thing they did was, with solar in America right now, if you really want to hook it up correctly, right? So if you want to hook it up, so there's several ways you can hook it up. So you hook up solar, you can you can just use it for like goofy little things. But if you really want to hook it into your entire home system, then it gets more complex, and it's a question of, so there's a real key fork in the road, which is you can set it up so that you use your own solar power
Right.
until the point where you need the grid, and then it'll switch over and
Mm.
pull the excess from the grid. So if your solar is generating, X amount of power, and you need X plus 15%, you can suck the other 15%. So you need to put in electronics to do that will automatically start pulling things down from the grid to supplement your own power. Beyond that, the next step after that, which is more interesting, is what if you're generating more power than you need,
Yeah.
and you can
That's
set
happening
it
in
up so that
Germany.
it starts dumping it back onto the grid,
Yeah.
and the utility pays you or gives you a credit for how much you pump back onto the grid. But this all required permits, and it required electricians, and it required complex circuitry. And now they've got this thing called balcony solar, which literally is a solar panel. And coming out of
Mm-hmm.
the solar panel is a plug, a normal
Mm-hmm.
plug. And you plug that plug into a normal wall socket, and voila, it's powering the house at that
Wow.
point. And the only state in America, well, I don't know if it's the only state still, but the first state to enable this, which was, I think, a year ago, was Utah. And
Interesting.
so you go out, and it's also the regulatory framework. And you go out, you buy this thing, you put it on your balcony. It's why it's called balcony solar, because you just hang these panels off your balcony rail, and you
Ah.
plug it into the wall, because you don't need, you plug it into
So
the
the
wall.
yeah.
So the installation is zero. And also, I think, again, I'm going way out on a limb here, but I think the whole thing is what they figured out in Utah was to handle all the regulatory stuff, so you didn't have to get a permit, and you just did it. And it's automatically understood that the utility will buy your extra power. But I may be wrong about that. But
Mm-hmm.
it's really exciting. From one standpoint, it's really exciting. From another standpoint, it's really not worrying, but it's going to complexify things a lot,
Yeah.
because, again, this grid is big and really expensive to maintain. Somebody's got to pay for that grid to remain around, even if you're not using it nearly as much as you used to. And the question is, at what point? But who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. We live in an age of wonders. It wouldn't surprise me if tomorrow some research lab somewhere in the world comes out and says, "Yeah, we found that if we take raspberry jam, and mix it with polyp DNA, the again, to revisit something that we've revisited a million times, which I know you'll love. Distraction was so on.
Yeah.
Like when the car
Yeah.
company guy says the cars are worth nothing, the only money that's in making cars anymore is the batteries. And here comes some guy who makes a box full of bug guts. He's going to
Right.
blow our entire. We got to stop him
We got to
because
stop
it's
the bug guts.
this
Yeah.
researcher figures out how to take like these bacteria and re-engineer them so they make electrical power, and you can basically have infinite power out of a
Right.
box full of
Right.
bug guts. And that's going to happen
Yeah.
at some point.
This is the thing, is like I think at some point market forces work against, you know, certain new types of technologies, because it's very beneficial to society, but it's not very profitable, right, for business. And I think in some ways we kind of have to come to terms with that.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be really tricky, because the thing is, there's a lot of money to be made from the extraction, processing, and distribution of petroleum. I mean, arguably, it is the most important industry and has been since the end of World War II.
Right.
I mean, the world runs on petroleum. It's the magic. It is a magic substance.
Right.
And yeah, it generates CO2, and yeah, it generates plastic waste. But our modern way of living is absolutely incomprehensible without petroleum. And it's a magic substance. And a lot of people have made gargantuan sums of money. You just pump this crap out of the ground. It doesn't decay, it doesn't rot, it doesn't freeze, it doesn't blow up unless you really work at it. It's amazing. It's an amazing substance that has created a vast cornucopia of wonderful things for humanity. But it's based upon it's an extractive model, which means you need centralized resources. You need people who go out and prospect for it, who do all the geology. And these companies have enormous forces that go around, and a lot of money's made. And that model is going to be under some real pressure. And so you're going to have a lot of pushback from these industries, because the new model of solar doesn't work like that nearly as much. It's really like balcony solar. I mean, let's not forget the humble LED. I mean, the LED basically turned lights into free.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't need electricity for light anymore. You don't need the grid for light. You can run all the lights in your house for a year for nothing.
Right.
And so somebody came with the LED. In fact, sorry, I'm just rambling now, but it was basically because they were talking about who won Nobel Prize. You know, they're talking about Nobel Prize winners and who are some of the great Nobel Prize winners in like the last 50 years. And one guy, they say, is the guy who who perfected the blue LED, because LEDs is an old technology. And it was very easy for them to make a red LED. In fact, those were the first ones. It's easy to make a red LED. It's fairly easy to make other types of LED, but it's extraordinarily difficult to make a blue LED. And you can't make white light. You can't make a white LED unless you have the right combination of stuff. And that's what held LEDs back for a long time. And then I think he was Japanese, and figured out how to make a blue LED. And everyone's like, yeah, okay, great, show, Isaguro made a blue LED. You go, great,
Right.
what's for lunch? And everyone's like, no, you don't understand. Now we can make white LEDs, and now we hit the hockey stick point where people are going to be buying these. And now you can, you can go down, you can buy a string of LEDs for $3 and rig them all over the place, and they're amazing. So fascinating. The other thing too, the headline today, the FDA approved a cholesterol reduction pill from Merck that is better than statins.
Really?
And lowers your cholesterol by an astronomical amount.
Wow.
And it's a pill, and you just take it. Whereas they had this drug, but you had to get an injection every month. And the injections cost, a lot of money. Now they got a pill, and yeah, it's right now, I think it's like $310 a month.
Right.
But give it time, and it'll drop, and it'll drop, and it'll drop. So we live in a world of wonders. And a friend of mine came down with pancreatic cancer, and maybe you got 3 months.
Right.
And he's back. driving
Wow.
a car. He said, "Yeah, they got some new treatments now. I think it is an age of wonders. They really are knocking down a lot of things, and I think the great thing is that there's a lot of battery technology going on, and it's just going to happen. It's just going to take time, and it's a question about how much backdraft, how much back push you get from established interests and things like that. But as somebody once said, the Stone Age didn't come to an end because we ran out of stones. It's just there is a better technology and it takes
Right.
time and adoption is spotty and there's political forces that push you backwards or push you to the side or do this or do that, but it's going to happen.
Right.
And it's going to be a solar and wind world. And also the tidal, they're doing
The title's amazing. I
the
love the
Europeans
title.
are doing all kinds of things with tidal energy and blah, 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 blah. We could go on forever
He's
and
like,
ever
I
and ever.
power my car with the moon. I love this idea.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Really brilliant. Anyway.
So we read, or I read at least.
I got half the way through it. I'm very proud
Okay.
of myself.
Yeah,
I
good
got
job.
50% of the way through it, and it doesn't have a plot. So if you go
Right.
halfway through it, you get a really good. I think it's a pretty
I-
consistent book throughout.
I think you can extrapolate a lot from the halfway point. As it turns out, Appendix A is really interesting, and I didn't actually make it to Appendix A, but it's the history of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is something that I'm interested in. Like, where did this come from? Where did this text come from? How did it evolve? But this book is How We Live is How We Die by Pema Chödrön, and it is a guide to your own death and to the death of helping other people who are dying, and but also broadening this idea of, and it focuses around this idea of the Bardo, which is the sort of space between life and death. And in Tibetan mythology or in Tibetan tradition and in Tibetan teachings, um, this life that you're experiencing is very much like a dream. And when you die, all of the aspects of the dream fall away, and you end up in a kind of more chaotic dream and kind of in between two different lives. And that during this time, if you are panicking, you will just kind of be washed along with the winds of this thing and end up in some new form somewhere down the road. So it shares a lot with Hinduism, and it shares a lot, and it's sort of Buddhism has this too, this notion of rebirth into some form or another. Um, and so she goes through the Tibetan Book of the Dead and talks about all the different realms that you can end up in, and also uh, ultimately, if you kind of skip all those because you're kind of in a state of mind that is in panic, then you will end up choosing a rebirth and sort of somewhere in among the human beings and animals, and hopefully not what the Tibetan believes the hungry ghosts, or and also hopefully not in the God realm, which is interesting. One of the things that she covers later on. But one of the most fascinating things that I found that she mentions early on in the book is that this is not a book about your literal death, but it is about finding that bardo in everyday life throughout your day, constantly happening.
Mhm.
Letting go of your past self, embracing your new self, the gap between when you stop at the light and when the light turns green. This is also the bardo. And we experience this sense of, uh, we can either experience a sense of panic, or we can kind of relax into the moment and move forward. And I found that the most interesting part of this book. Although the
The
other parts were
title
interesting too.
the title is very good, and just to put people's mind at ease, it's not a grim book. It's really not all that much. Like you said, it's how we live is how we die. And therefore, I saw it as basically a book of suggested exercises,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
what it is. It's a way, it's exercises you can do that not only you should do them now
Right.
to help you now
Yep.
with all the things, all the things that take place in our lives right now. But the good news is that these are good. It's the same with dying. That, as you said, what we call death is just another variant of the vicissitudes of life, that things are constantly breaking down and building up, and one thing ends and one thing begins.
Yeah.
And if you and dealing also with your what did she call them, your neuroses, or your what did she call them, the klesha or the
The
klesha,
kleshas. Yeah,
the
that's a Tibetan
kleshas.
term for the things that hold us back, or the things that make us unhappy in the Tibetan Buddhist sense. Are the kleshas, and they're everything in Tibetan Buddhism is numbered. That it's just bulleted lists. It's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bulleted lists, and I can never remember, because I have this kind of dyslexic ADHD mind. I can never keep them straight. There's five foundations or four foundations of mindfulness. I can't remember. There's the Eightfold Path. There's the three. The Four Noble Truths. There's the three jewels. It just goes on, and the kleshas are numbered, but it really does come down to how much are you clinging to things not changing, and how much are
Right.
you letting things change. And one of the interesting places where she talks about giving away your belongings, and that at some point before you die, you have to let go of your belongings. Your physical stuff is all you can't, you can't take it with you, just like the musical or the play said, the movie. Um, and that is funny. I mean, I often look around my place, and it's just, even though I pared down quite a lot when I moved here, it's packed with stuff.
Mhm.
And a lot of it, I mean, truly, I could throw away if I had to. I don't feel that much attachment. But towards the end of the book, there's a great story about a monk who had taken this very seriously and not have any attachment to things. He had given away his clothes, and he had given away all of his belongings. And as he realized that he was dying, and she talks about what happens when you die, that often, if you're not dying suddenly, that there's kind of a couple of stages that you go through. There's it's called the stage of fire. No, of the stage of
Earth is
water.
first.
Oh, earth.
Earth is
Yeah, you feel
first.
heavy.
Water second. Third
Water.
is the
You wait. What is uh yes, water is like, I forget. There's sort of a,
you get thirsty, and then
that's
you
the
get really
fire one.
cold, and then
Yeah,
you
and that
can't breathe. It's
exactly.
fun. That's the fun part of the
Yeah,
book.
and you're like, oh,
Um,
looking forward to that.
um,
But during this time, when the monk was dying, um, when he realized he was going through the phases of dying, the last thing he did was he reached for his teacup and threw it out the window. It was the last thing he had. And this, I mean, aside from your own stuff, and there's discussion about how letting go of your stuff and being really clear about who gets what is really actually very important karmically in the Buddhist sense, so that people do not fight over your stuff when you're gone, um, creating a kind of a negative sense around your passing, which will affect you in the Bardo, according to the mythologies. But also just letting go of your mental stuff. And of course, that's very helpful before you die.
yeah,
It's definitely something that you should work on before the moment.
yeah. Basically, you're not doing these things in preparation for death. What she
Right.
basically says is that these are good things to do right now. And oh, by the way, they come in really handy, um, you know, during the end stage, when you go through the bardos of death. And there's like four stages. There's the bardo of dharma, and there's the bardo of this. And
Yes.
yeah, I don't have them memorized. You're right. They
Dharmakala. So the first stage, as I remember, and the kind of thing that I want to kind of reread or go back and check out different chapters. And also, it's interesting to read this. I had listened to an audiobook. It was a book on tape back in the day when I was out on tour, and I was driving through New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. And I listened to Richard Gere read the entirety of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And that was a really magical series of drives that I did from place to place. I was really looking forward to hearing the next part. There's something about the way he reads it that's really beautiful. So if you can get your hands on that audio, it's really interesting. But there are phases. At first, you really have the opportunity to let go of everything and just become kind of one with the universe, or as I think the literature says, you can, reincarnate it as a lotus flower at the foot of the Buddha or something like that. But that's really like letting go of all ego, letting go of, you become an enlightened being and you no longer return to the cycle of birth, old age, sickness, and death. It's called samsara. And then later, there is a chance to be incarnated in a pure land. And there are several of these, and they all have names and they all have different qualities. And there was an interesting story about a Rinpoche who said, "When I die, I want to go to this pure land." And his wife, though, was like, "No, I'm not going there. I want to go to this pure land. It's much nicer."
Florida.
Yeah,
Come
I'm going to
on.
Florida. I'm, I'm, I want to go to the land of the white clouds and the eternal sunshine. And he's like, "No, I want to go to the one with storms and earthquakes." And there was a story about his son who was traveling with him and had wanted to go with his mother. And then it said, "You know what? Actually, I think I want to go with you, Dad."
I'll hang with Dad.
Interesting. Yeah. And the thing is, you don't need to believe in any of this stuff. If by reading this, the book is actually helpful whether or not you want to buy into all of the life after death kind of stuff that comes along with Buddhism. I'm a Buddhist, and I'm not entirely sold on reincarnation myself. But it contemplating these things does change you in terms of your own, life before you die. And I found that a lot of it was really interesting and helpful. But yeah, I'd like to hear more about what you thought, Lionel, because it's really not your wheelhouse. This is squarely in my my religion, basically.
Well, the thing that made me think of, and I took some notes here. The thing it really made me think of was, from my own experience, is disaster preparedness. So one of the things I really enjoyed about working at the universities is one of the things you have to work on if you're in information security is you have to maintain the policies that are required for information security. And one of the big part of those policies is disaster recovery, DR.
Right.
How do you recover from a disaster? And one of the funny things is that you think about that. I'm not gonna go. I could go on this for hours and hours and hours and hours. But the interesting thing is you don't. The whole point of disaster recovery is to think very carefully about what's going to happen when the disaster occurs. And then what you don't want to do is you don't want to be improvising.
Right.
You don't want to be improvising. In a disaster, you're going to have to improvise a lot.
Right.
But the issue is anything that you don't have to improvise on, don't. Because what happens during disaster is that people get overwhelmed. And they start making poor decisions, so they can't make decisions at all because we only have a certain amount of decision-making capacity per day and stuff like that. So just to give an interesting example, and so what you do is you build these lists like the Tibetans. Tibetans must be masterful disaster recovery people because it's all about lists.
Right.
And so when you talk to people who really do this for a living, it's like, okay, do you have the list of all your vendors, their sales contacts, their phone numbers and emails? And it's like, wow, I never thought about that. They said, yeah. What if your server room gets flooded and you need to buy 50 servers from Dell? He said, and what if you don't have your account number because the account number was in your office that got washed down the river?
Yeah.
And
on a sticky on your
on a post-it note on your monitor, and it's like you call up Dell and say I need 50 servers. Well, they're gonna want some numbers at that point, and they're gonna want authorization, and maybe you're not the person to authorize it. So you have to think very carefully ahead of time about, okay, how do we do this? Where we're going to keep the lists and how we're going to do it. The other interesting thing, I worked at a university that regularly had to deal with hurricanes. You knew that every 5 years, every 7 years is going to be a hurricane.
Right.
And one of the problems with the hurricane, one of the problems with the disaster is that a core tenet of disaster recovery is that life and safety and family come first.
Mm.
So if you have a person who's critical to your disaster recovery, um, they're going to care about their family first before you, and you have to respect that. And so, one of the things that was on the list, the disaster countdown list, and the good thing about a hurricane is that it's a slow moving disaster, so you can actually have
You track it.
very carefully structured lists. And they did, and they had them tied to certain events, like when the wave heights got to a certain height and you had sustained
Mm.
winds over a certain amount. That's track point two, and that's when you pull out the track point two list and you start doing the things on the track point
Wow.
on the point two list. And one of them was, we booked rooms in hotels that were like 100 miles away from the university,
Interesting.
so that if you're a key person who needs to get the university back on its feet, your family are okay. We've reserved a bunch of rooms in this town that's 100 miles away. Here's the reservation number. Here's where the hotel is located. Your family can go there and they'll be okay. And it's already been paid for.
Fascinating. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the interesting thing is that, so you start doing this
Hmm.
and you start building that muscle,
Right.
which is thinking about the future,
Right.
not freaking out,
Hmm.
and coming up with good lists. Let me just crank down. I think I'm getting an echo here, so let me just crank down the volume on my
Could
headphones
be
a little
me.
bit. Well, I got you way up high. And so this comes back to Pema Chödrön, which is that you get comfortable. You say,
Right.
oh, you don't panic. And it also reminds me of The Martian. And
Hmm.
The Martian, at the end of The Martian, one of my favorite scenes of The Martian is the end where, he's talking to the class of cadets. And he says, the question that everybody always asks me is, did you think you're going to die? And the answer
Right.
is yes.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen to you too. Space is unforgiving. At some point, everything's going to go wrong. And you're going to say to yourself, this is how I end. And he said, you can just sit there and accept that, or you can get to work. And you solve one problem, and then you solve the next problem. And if you
Right.
solve enough problems, maybe you get to go home. And that's actually a really interesting paraphrase of a famous quote from an astronaut called John Young, who said, yeah, we have a lot of checklists when we're up here, when we're flying in space. It's checklist after checklist. He says it's stuff to keep you busy while you wait to die. Like if there's an emergency on the spacecraft, we have a list for that. We have a
Mm.
book and we have a list. And he said, and what he says, I'm not even sure really like we're doing anything, but they basically just want to keep you busy while you're
Right.
waiting to die, because otherwise you're just going to lock up and freak out. And if
Yeah.
there's any hope of surviving, you're not going to do it because you're panicking. And so that's the way I see Pema Chödrön's book, which is, and so the good thing is that you get comfortable with it. So it's just not like, oh my God, this situation's occurring, I'm
Right.
freaking out.
Yeah.
Maybe you've done really shitty planning. Maybe you really
Yeah.
haven't given a much, but just the fact that you thought about it, you're relaxed. It's like,
Right.
I've chopped
This
in
is
some time on this. I got it under control. It's total
this is a
bullshit.
natural thing that's happening. This is going to happen as Amos Burden says to Alex when they're kind of stuck inside of the ring in one of the later episodes of The Expanse, which we watched today. I think Alex is saying, I just have this feeling like, I can't do anything. I'm freaking out because I feel like we're all going to die. And Amos Burden looks at him and goes, we are all going to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's that sense of like, oh, this is like normal. And yeah, right. I mean, it wasn't what I planned, but that sense that you can relax into it. And that if it is metaphysical, that you can relax into that metaphysical space, even while the chaos of the Bardo kind of swirls around you. And, other people who have died are running to and fro, running from things they're terrified of, trying to get back into life, that you can relax and just be part of what's happening.
And I think a key part of that is people earning it in their minds. Again, I think sometimes some of this stuff, just in the way that John Young says, I'm not really sure these checklists mean anything. They're just there to keep us busy while we wait to die. I think much in the same way, some of these things, it's dubious whether they really actually do anything. But the
Hmm.
whole point is the way we as human beings, the way our brains work is we've got to earn things. Like we have this innate sense that you got to give to get. And you got to work hard to get the rewards and all those we're wired that way. We're wired in such a way that, you know, some people naturally have it, but we got to work. And so therefore, if I work, then I've earned it, which may be total nonsense. You may be doing work that's completely beside the point
Right.
and things like that. And don't get me started on like paychecks and things like that. Yeah, I show up every day at 8 o'clock and I get a paycheck. It's like, yeah, those things are not as tightly correlated as you might think, but we're not gonna. But the whole point is, it's all about putting yourself at ease, and I think that sort of flows back to Pema Chödrön's thing, which is that you tense up, you clench up,
Right.
you don't know what's going on, so you hold things close to you, and anytime something changes, you flip out, and you just have to work at it to own the fact that I'm good. I'm
Hmm.
good. I've thought about this. I know what's going on here, even though you probably don't. I know
Right.
what's going on here. And you keep everybody calm. And that's sort of a lot of disaster recovery is that you have these checklists and you have these processes. And it may be that 30 minutes into the disaster, you throw the checklist,
Right.
the
Yeah.
checklist doesn't really mean anything at that point. But still, you wrote a checklist. I had this
Hmm.
checklist and I worked really hard on this checklist. So I'm okay. I've earned it. I'm I'm good with the maker here. Even though this checklist, even though the situation has gone completely off the rails, I've done my job. And it's really important for human beings to be relaxed. So they can deal with what happens so things just don't turn into a complete screaming nightmare.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, man. It does make me wonder, like, why can't we relax? Why does it take so much work? And also just the teachings of somebody wiser who has some kind of perspective on this, that if it is such a natural process, why can't we simply relax into it? And I think it has to do with being a human being largely. It's just that
Oh yeah.
we tend to want or think that we control things. Often we think we control things by the way we think about them. Um, and maybe in some ways we do, but there are some things that are beyond our control. You can't will yourself to live to be 800 years old, and that and even if you did, then at the end of 800 years you have to go through the natural process of it coming to an end. And this is a very interesting it's a very interesting book that kind of really talks about letting go of the stuff that you once you discover that you're clinging to things, whether it's kind of the way you behave in traffic, or the way you get out of bed in the morning, or the way you make your breakfast, or whatever, that when you become aware of the way in which you're holding on to stuff and unwilling to let go of things, you can begin that process of just like kind of unclenching and just relaxing.
Well,
And I think in general it's very healthy.
the other interesting thing she talks about, which I liked a lot, was she says, don't don't push your neuroses, don't deny them, and don't
Right.
push them away. Don't say, "Oh, I'm an angry person, but I'm not going to be an angry person anymore because being angry is bad." She says, "No, that's not how you do it.
Right.
You invite anger in, you breathe it in,
Yeah.
you look at your anger, and you look to it like almost like a friend, and you understand it, and you bring it in, and you recognize, you take ownership of the fact that, yeah, I'm an angry person, and then you start working on that. But what she says is you just can't do this thing where you deny it and you say, I'm not going to do that anymore, and
Shove
I
it in a
hate it.
closet, close the
I
door.
hate
Yeah.
being an angry person, and I hate it, and I'm not going to be that person anymore. I'm going to be a different person. She says, no, you have to do the opposite. You have to embrace it. And what she talks about a lot in the section that I read, which is that she mentions the five kleshas, which are aggression, craving, ignorance, pride, and jealousy. And
Mm.
she says each of them has a flip side, which is a wisdom
Right.
that comes from that behavior. The aggressive people, the flip side of it is mirror-like wisdom. Not really sure what the hell she's talking about there, but I'm okay with that one. But the one I understand a little better is craving.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of that is discrimination wisdom, that
Mm.
you are involved in the world and you can discriminate between things, and you understand all the details of the world, and you can say this is this and that's that, and this is a little better than this one, or this one has this particular characteristic, because you're a craver, you're a person who needs to take stuff in, so therefore
Right.
you're good to script. So she says, just don't do this thing where you just push everything away,
Because you
or
miss
you just
out. You miss out
right,
on finding the wisdom side of the klesha. And
right.
fear, of course, is that same. That's I think that's the big one. Uh, is that sense of, when you feel fear, then the instruction, at least from her teacher and his teachers before him, is to lean into it and to question it and become curious about that fear.
And don't try to deny it. Don't just say
Don't deny it.
I'm not going to be afraid anymore. It's like, yeah, that
Right.
doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
um yeah, it's interesting stuff. So that, and it also brought up one of the things we read when we did that other that book, Buddhism Through the Centuries, that
Yeah.
long
Lopez.
history book. And she sort of brushes up against it, but she walks past it, which is one of the big paradoxes, or one of the big ever ongoing debates in Buddhism, is if there's no I,
Yes.
then what gets reincarnated? And she does sort of try to deal with it. It's like, what gets reincarnated if everything is flux, and this concept of I or me is really just very flimsy, perhaps even non-existent, then what gets reincarnated? And the answer is, nobody can really explain that in any satisfactory way.
She
And
gives the
not,
high the sort of universal sense answer, and also the kind of relative answer. The relative answer is, now I forget what she said. All you take with you is is it your attitude, or is it your tendencies?
or
This
you
was
could take
given
the
to her.
glaciers with you. It's sort of what she implies, is that if
Yeah,
you
that
don't deal with
there's
these, that's what you're going to take with you.
they're like deep habits,
Right.
and the deep habits do go with you. But what actually gets reincarnated at the universal level? The answer is nothing. And that's such a Buddhist, contradiction, that nothing gets reincarnated because none of that is real. Sort of in the biggest perspective, it's just emptiness. And yet this sense that your tendencies can continue into the Bardo and into your next life
Right.
is interesting. I
It's
don't know if it's
interesting
true,
stuff, but it's a light read. I mean, it's an easy read.
Yeah.
The chapters are short. It's a very gentle voice
Yeah.
that's instructing you, and it's at least up until 50%. It's basically these are some pointers for developing habits, that things you can start practicing right now that will make your life better now and will serve you well when you come to the end of your life. So I thought that was interesting. And then something just flitted into my head and flitted right back out again. But anyway, what do
She
you
could
want
have
to say?
called the book Disaster Preparedness. Would have worked just as well.
Well,
Right.
and the famous quote is Dwight David Eisenhower, which is, plans are worthless. Planning is everything.
Right.
I think that's a great Buddhist.
Yeah.
I think it's a very
Yeah.
Buddhist
It sort of
statement. Oh, I
mirrors
know
that.
I know it flitted into my head.
Yeah.
But it's a really great Buddhist statement. And there's a couple of other things I think of, but I'm not going to go that far. But one thing I do want to mention is another book. I'm not going to ask you to read it,
Okay.
but I started rereading it. It's a little bit of a tough slog. So Douglas Hofstadter wrote a book called Gödel, Escher, Bach, which was a huge success when it came out, an enormous success. And in that, so two important things about that book. One, he said he was disappointed in the reaction to the book.
Interesting.
Because he said people missed the main point of the book. He said when he read what people were writing about the book and what people were saying about the book and stuff like that, he said they really missed the point of the book. Because, and I'm not going to go into because it's really it's not really complex, but I think it's just too far afield. So he wrote another book called "I Am a Strange Loop," which he says, okay, I'm just going to retell the main point of Gödel, Escher, Bach.
Yeah.
And what he's always been fascinated by, what Hofstadter has always been not obsessed, but focused on, is consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the foundation of consciousness? And what is the foundation of this conscious mind that we have? And if I remember correctly, we've talked about elements of this up to this point, which is
the
our
ego
ability
tunnel, the ego tunnel and the idealism angle.
I don't know about ego tunnel. I remember that one.
That was one that basically purported that consciousness is an illusion, and that it is a recursive loop that happens. So I think it may have some relation to.
And that's Douglas Hofstadter's thing, is that he actually wrote an intermediary book called "I Am a Strange." Well, that's the book I'm reading. Mm-hmm. "I Am a Strange Loop," which sort of flows into the whole concept of, it's not intellectuals who can hold mutually opposing ideas at the same time. It's all of us,
right?
Because you're constantly dealing with things that make no rational sense. It's not that they don't make rational sense, but they sort of contradict each other. You have these strange loops, that are self-creating each other. It's like his favorite picture is the Escher picture of the one hand drawing the other hand on the piece of paper, and that to him, he says, is sort of like a central idea of consciousness. But what was interesting about, so I'm gonna reread that. I'm gonna bring that back to the show. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing, what I really liked about Gödel, Escher, Bach, is that he has a very specific agenda in Gödel, Escher, Bach, and it takes a long time. And I never got through it entirely. And I really want to go through the book one more time. But there's the I mode and the P mode, I think, or maybe mixed. But there's two modes of thought, and the whole point is they keep flip-flopping against each other. And what we do is we map one set of phenomenon onto another set of phenomenon, and then we believe that they are each other. So, there's mathematics, and when you and I learn math, we learn math as, okay, I got 5 goats, and somebody gives me another 5 goats, I've got 10 goats. So 5 plus 5 equals 10.
Yeah.
And if I give 2 of my goats away at a gym, I've got 8 goats. And we all think about that. But there's another way of thinking about mathematics, which is that it's just symbol manipulation. You could teach somebody how to do mathematics without telling them that that symbol of 5 is the same thing as the number of fingers on your hand. You don't have to tell people. You just have to say, if you see this symbol and this symbol and this symbol, then you complete that string with this. If you see a 5, a plus sign, a 5, an equal sign, you can complete that string and make it a legitimate string by adding a 1 0 on the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're teaching somebody how to do mathematics without teaching them anything that we think of as mathematics. You're just teaching them symbol manipulation.
Right.
You're just manipulating symbols. There's rules about how to manipulate these symbols on a page. But what we do is we map that onto something else. And to us, I can't see 5 plus 5 equals 10 without thinking of, okay, I got 5 marbles and somebody gives me 5 marbles and I got 10 more. Hey, great. We just naturally do that. But what he says is, because we become so used to that we assume that that's how the world works, but it's not. And to me, that's interesting because that sort of loops back to Buddhism, which is you dispel these things and you realize how these things are all just sort of tied to each other. They're really not each other.
Right.
They're just things that are mapped onto each other. And the mind is such that we just naturally do this thing where we say, oh, that's mathematics. We're talking about goats and giving goats to my neighbor and getting more goats from my neighbor. It's like, no, that's not what it is. If you clear your mind, it's just a separate thing. And a similar thing happens when, people get on the news and they say, oh, scientists have discovered that, the space is curved.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is no, they haven't. What they have is they have a new explanation, a new explanatory framework that matches more or less or better than before observed phenomenon. But we've had lots of these explanatory frameworks. We have these pictures in our head that there's little particles inside the atom. They're all clumped together. That's
Right.
the nucleus. There's
The
all these
electrons we were
electrons
talking
flying
about
around.
before, yeah.
And
Yeah.
everybody goes, well, there's nobody has any idea what's going on down there. But it works really well.
Right.
We have this picture in our head that we map onto physical reality. And it works so well that we assume that that's what reality is. And it's not.
Right.
And I think that's very Buddhist. So anyway, back to Douglas Hofstadter. So he does this. And so I think that's the two modes. So there's this interaction between those two modes. And then you have problems with level switching, which is this sentence is false.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The problem with that and the paradox it creates. And then in the middle of the book, he comes to a screeching halt and he spends a very large chapter on Zen Buddhism.
Interesting. Wait, is that in Gödel-Escher Bach? It is.
Gödel-Escher Bach. And he spends a long time on Zen Buddhism. He talks about Ganto's axe, and he talks about the koans, and he talks about this, and he talks about that. And he said Zen Buddhism is really important because, we tend to think in dualities. We tend to think of something mapped onto something else. He said, it's really important to remember there's a third path, which is that this is all nonsense. We're not nonsense. But it's the problem with context setting. You sort of draw a frame around the universe. You have a theory that draws a frame around physical reality, and you work inside that frame, and you become so involved in it, and it becomes so powerful a theory and so important a world image in your mind that you assume that that's everything.
Right.
And the great thing about Zen is it comes along and says, no, there's a frame. And there's something beyond that frame. And you have no language to talk about what's beyond that frame. And he talks about Ganto's axe and something like Ganto walks in on a novice monk who's praying and he walks in with an axe. And he says, if you have the Buddha nature, I will cut off your head. And if you don't have the Buddha nature, I will cut off your head. Which is it going to be? The monk's like, oh, is this like
is there a third option?
What's the Kobayashi Maru thing from Star Trek? Is there like a middle choice here? And then the monk says something completely unrelated, and Ganta says, "Right answer." He walks out, and it's really, and also the other thing too is like humor. Like, where does humor fit? Into this whole thing? And humor is sort of like you're breaking the frame. You're saying, okay, all the stuff that we've really gotten focused on. You know how humor will break the ice. It'll change the mood. It will relax people because you get so, sort of going back to Pema Chödrön, you get so wrapped up in this particular world, you get so focused on it, you forget that there's a world outside of it.
Well, and that's that notion that we are very attached to the structures that we create that we think that coincide with our lives and our reality. The models we build of other people, the models we build of our street, of the route that we're going to take, the models we build of our work, the models that we hold in our brain. And when we find out that well, actually things don't work the way our models work, then you have a crisis and you freak out, and either you cling more tightly to the models that you had, or you have to throw away those models and you have to build something new, and it's very upsetting. Takes a lot of, but that, that, yeah, the
Or
Buddhist
you're
notion is
disillusioned,
you're
or
disillusioned.
you
And the
say
Buddhist notion
screw it.
is let go of the models, or at least put some distance between you and the models, so that when they arise, and they're bound to arise, you don't cling so tightly to them.
Well, you objectify them, and that's what these exercises are like. Don't push away your anger. Don't say, oh, it's too big, it's just, I'm not going to deal with it.
Right? It's too
Don't
scary. Got
do
to
that.
run.
It's because, and she talked about the fan, which I thought was really interesting. Remember that thing about when she was meditating, there was a fan going on, and the
Yes, that's
fan
right.
stopped for
Yeah.
3 seconds. And it's really interesting because that happens to me when I'm working in my music studio, is that, you're working on something, and all of a sudden something happens, and you're like, oh, that sound was always there. I didn't
Right.
even recognize that sound was there. My brain just assumed it's part of everything, and now it's gone. And
Right.
that really is like, the one I love is when in one book I read, somebody says they had a look on their face as if they had just taken a step. They had just gone to step onto the next step of a staircase, and there was nothing there. You have that moment when you wake up, and that's the Bardo. You're in there and you're like,
Yes.
oh, there's a frame around this. Like, this thing that I thought was all encompassing and was a permanent and necessary feature of my universe is just another thing that can be objectified, that can be contemplated, that can be welcomed,
Mm-hmm.
that can be cataloged, can be assigned a number like the freaking Tibetans do. Let's give it a number. And that's interesting, and I find that and that happens when all of a sudden, I think also it happens too, like when you deal with something for a very long time and then all of a sudden it's gone.
Right.
I don't know if this ever happened to you, but I've had things
Oh, it
where I've
has.
had like very minor medical issues that have been with me since I was a little kid, and you just get to the point like, I'm always going to have it. I just work around it. I'll
Right.
always have it. I always had problems with like ingrown toenails, or I had problems with my ears or something like that. And then one time, I've had problems with my ears my entire life. And then this one nurse says, oh, just take these drops. I'm like, yeah, you fool. I took the drops. Next morning it was all gone. And you're
And
like,
then, yeah.
and then there's that moment where you're like, wow, the world doesn't really, maybe my vision of the world is wrong. And maybe I have resigned myself to things that I should not have resigned myself to. And maybe there's things I should resign myself to that I don't. And maybe I'm just wrong. And maybe there's a frame, or maybe I need to see outside the frame that I've built for myself. Like you said, the things that you cling to, you build a cocoon around yourself of objects and relationships and conceptual structures. And then, like that famous guy that keeps getting copied in every single book, the guy who's sticking his head through the heavens, and he sticks his head through the sky and he sees all the prima mobile outside, the real nature of the universe. I don't know if it's that
Well, Pema
heroic.
talks about it as the gap. There's a gap, and within that gap, that's the opportunity, is to just be in the gap without rebuilding. It's a gap between each of our actions, and you can also describe that gap as the Bardo. This is sort of where there's the opportunity to just let go of it all and just be in the gap. And I think that's kind of where she's leading with a lot of the instructions here. But to do that, you have to do a lot of work on yourself. You have to really learn to relax with whatever is coming up.
It'd be good if you actually did listen to that chapter. I'll see if I can find it. Just
Sure.
that one chapter from Gödel Escher Bach about Zen Buddhism.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And sorry, because I have to bring this in. And of course, everybody, you've already guessed what I'm going to say next, which is Tom Bombadil.
No, I didn't guess that at all.
I know, I'm joking. I'm being facetious. It's like,
we're gonna have to go back to Tom Bombadil.
What's next? The Easter Bunny? Tom Bombadil. So the interesting thing about Tom Bombadil is that it is the most inexplicable thing in all the Lord of the Rings. And Peter Peter Jackson was I think he made a very wise move in excising Tom Bombadil entirely from his
Right.
movies. And people asked Tolkien, what's up with Tom Bombadil?
Yeah.
Hey, Tolkien, what's up with Tom Bombadil? And he was very tight-lipped about it, but he finally did say, he says, the key thing about the Lord of the Rings is that everybody else in the Lord of the Rings is either for or against the ring.
Mm.
Everybody's on one side or the other. Everybody, all their actions are being determined by in fact, all the actions of everything in Middle Earth is being determined by the ring. He said,
Right.
except Tom Bombadil. And he said, Tom Bombadil is a reminder that there's something outside there. Like there's something outside. Like what you think is this all-encompassing thing. It's just it is self-contained, and there's things outside of it, and perhaps things bigger than it. And I think it's very interesting how this is all tied together. I think that's a lot about her, and I think that's the whole point. We do this all the time. You and I and any human being on this planet. Like when I go through a difficult situation, when you're younger, it's harder because you're meeting a lot of things for the first time. But now I go through situations where in the past I would have just completely flipped out. I'm like, you know what? In the past, I flipped out about this and nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I really scarred myself emotionally, and it was completely unnecessary. And then there's things that I paid absolutely no attention to that ended up actually whacking me pretty hard. So let's just take advantage of that experience and understand that I'm bigger than that. There's a whole world out there.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen? And there's no point in getting yourself worked up unnecessarily. Same with disaster recovery. Don't run around screaming. Have a checklist. Checklist may be bullshit, but at least you got a checklist.
Right.
You can do that. And
well, right. You can't cling to the checklist, right? Because things may change that are not on the checklist, and then you have to be like, "Oh, that's outside the checklist." Right? We're looking.
But at least I made a checklist.
But I have
I'm
one.
good.
Yeah.
Because the problem is we feel guilty if we don't have the checklist. If things start going wrong and we didn't make a checklist, then we blame ourselves and say the things are going wrong because I didn't make a checklist. And the answer is no, they're not. They're going to go wrong anyway.
Right.
And so it's this weird contradictory thing, which is the foundation of human life, which is you making the checklist didn't change anything in the world out there. The only thing it did is it changed your attitude on how you approach this. You made something out of nothing. You put some words on a piece of paper, and because of that, and it goes back to my favorite, another favorite phrase of mine is that from Milton's Paradise Lost: the mind is its own place and can make a hell of heaven and a heaven of hell. And sometimes it's just convincing people, just changing their minds. It's like, there's something bigger than this. You think that this is all encompassing, your pride is all encompassing. It's not.
Yeah.
It's just another thing that you can deal with. It's not that big. It's not heroic. It's not a titanic struggle of gods going on inside you. It's just something that you probably should deal with. And there's ways to deal. And the first way to deal with it is just to understand that it exists. And that's not the biggest thing in the world, that there's always there's always something beyond the frame there. Anyway, that's the end of my wisdom.
I'm glad I brought this book to our attention. It's one that I had wanted to read, and I feel like we both got something out of it. Which, I'd recommend it. I'd recommend it really to anybody. The thing is that there is a lot of Buddhist woo in it, and you do not have to take that as true. There's plenty there for you to learn from and to read about and to contemplate. And so, and next week, we have a guest. Julian Fisher is going to be joining us, a photographer, and many other things. I sent you his bio. It's quite impressive.
He's going to be talking about upstate New York, right? It's mainly his history, his photo history of upstate New York.
He's done a number of projects on different themes, and this theme is on upstate New York. And climate and farming and art, and just getting kind of a sense through photography and some essays that he wrote about upstate New York as a whole, which is a pretty huge subject. So I think it'll be pretty interesting to talk to him, and he's also just a fascinating guy. So hopefully you'll pick that up when we put that out.
Well, what I'll do is I'll see if I can hunt down that chapter of Gödel Escher Bach on Zen.
On Zen. Well, I can also just get the audiobook and listen to it.
That's what I mean.
Since that does seem to be, I really kind of want to get back into reading on the page again. But I tend to consume these things when I'm driving or when I'm about to fall asleep. So it's sort of hard to find the actual time to sit down with a book and read, but I'm kind of missing it now. But I think in this case, I'll just listen to the chapter because that would be a fun way to absorb the Zen, is to hear someone read it.
Yeah, and then after you've listened to that, tell me if you want to possibly. I'm going to go and read "I Am a Strange Loop."
I could read that with you.
Because I think Hofstadter's really digging into a lot of the. He's not. So he's. I think the interesting thing is that he's digging a lot of things, but it's coming from such a completely different angle. He's not, Pema Chödrön's book is a practical hand guide for developing practices to make your life, to better get in touch with yourself and prepare for the afterlife. Yeah, that ain't Doug Hofstadter.
No.
He's not interested in you improving yourself. He's absolutely single-handedly focused on what is consciousness and how does it arise and what are the essential elements, what's the essential elements of it.
Well, I'm fascinated by that. So I think that would be a really good read.
Okay, cool.
And that is that.
Okay.
As far as I can tell. So
roll the outro.
Is produced by Jim Infantino at Slab Media in Boston. Jim Infantino and Lionel Casson are the co-hosts. Our website is funnynotfunny.net. The theme music is from the song Wheel from the album Utopia Revisited by Jim. The opinions presented by the co-hosts are ridiculous and should not be taken seriously by anyone. Our intended audience is literally nobody. If you're listening to this podcast, you should probably pause to reflect on other choices you've recently made. Please do not subscribe or leave a rating or review. It only encourages us to make more. Thanks for listening.